Welcome back to In Focus. As we discussed on the show yesterday, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act does a lot of things. It gives the IRS the potential to be larger than the Pentagon, the State Department, the FBI, and Border Patrol combined. It taxes most of the country, and it allocates $369 billion to fight climate change, supposedly. Now, the climate change aspect is especially absurd considering the name of the bill, since inflation has been caused in large part by the left's climate agenda, killing energy independence and sending gas prices to the moon. Kamala Harris, nonetheless, touted the Inflation Reduction Act not as a bill to fight inflation, but to fight climate change.
Thanks to our President Joe Biden and his leadership, we are on the verge of signing into law the Inflation Reduction Act. And to put this in context, this piece of legislation will be the largest investment ever made to address the climate crisis. We are watching it, indeed.
And as we have seen time and again from the left, they are such narcissists that they really believe they can control the weather, the world's climate, by having some meetings and signing pieces of paper. Joe Biden just said as much recently. Listen to this.
They're not just Kentuckians, they're Americans. They're Americans. This happened in America. American problem. And we're all Americans. Everybody has an obligation to help. We have the capacity to do this. It's not like it's beyond our control. The weather may be beyond our control for now, but it's not beyond our control.
The weather is not beyond our control, so says Joe Biden. And it can't be. It can't be beyond our control for the left, because if the weather remains the weather and not another political tool of the left, we will all be doomed. If nature does naturing, we will literally die. This is what they want you to believe. This is what they claim to believe. Or more recently, forget dying, at the very least, infectious diseases will become supercharged because of climate change. That's according to a study reported on by the very serious journalists at HuffPost. According to this study, 70,000 scientific studies have pinpointed how climate change has influenced 375 pathogenic diseases, and apparently, the emission of greenhouse gases has the ability to beef up 58% of all human-threatening diseases. And there you have it. The experts have spoken, right? Never mind that climate experts have been abhorrently wrong about the vast majority of their studies about the so-called climate crisis. Never mind that they have incorrectly predicted extinction, mass famine, and the end of the world more than Hunter Biden has solicited hookers. They finally got it right. They finally got it. We have to allocate hundreds of billions of dollars to try and control the weather, or everyone's going to either die or get super sick a lot more often. Call me skeptical of this claim. Joining me now, founder of the Climate Depot, Marc Morano. Marc, help us clear the air here. Is climate change supercharging a bunch of diseases that are going to make everyone sick and probably start killing off people? Is that a thing that's happening?
Wow, this is huge. First of all, it's the exact opposite. What they're saying is that climate is creating a crazy, unpredictable nature that's infecting new viruses. The opposite has occurred in the last 100 years. First of all, climate-related deaths dropped 99% since 1920, number one. Number two, we are actually more removed. The more fossil fuels we have, the more infrastructure, the more heating and air conditioning, the more people crowd into cities, the more disconnected you are from nature, from viruses, from animals. So if anything, you would argue that as we go forward with development, we're less likely. Now, the important thing about this, and this is huge, Addison, Harvard School of Health, which is Chinese funded, partially got this same argument, claiming that unchecked climate change will lead to COVID-like viruses. A study in the journal Nature a few months ago just made the same claim. Viruses are going to skyrocket unless we take care of climate change. They're now setting up the scene where if you don't support the big federal pork barrel climate bill or the Green New Deal or the UN Paris Agreement, you're a grandma killer because you're going to create unchecked virus because of unchecked climate change. This is where they want to go. It's a merging of COVID and climate. It's the natural progression of fear. They failed with the fear for climate for decades. COVID did scare people. A virus cuts across party and ideological lines. So now they're merging it, and this is where we are. You either stop climate change or you're going to kill people with the virus.
Well, and Biden is now saying that any natural disaster that happens, anytime there's a tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake or a
Yeah.
flood or a wildfire, it's because of climate change. Biden just said this about the flood, the tragic flood that happened in Kentucky the other week. He said that this was a consequence of climate change. We have a clip of that.
As you all know, we've suffered a consequence of climate change, a significant number of weather catastrophes around the nation. Just in the year and a half I've been president, I've flown over thousands of acres of fire.
Now, clear the air for us on that, Mark, too. So you already debunked the idea that everyone's going to get super sick because of climate change, because all these diseases are going to get beefed up. Are floods happening? Are natural disasters happening because humans are driving gas vehicles?
I mean, this is absolute nonsense. The United Nations major hydrological journals have shown studies on global floods 50 to 100 years. There's either no increase or it's been declining on global time scales, on climate scales. You can always find, oh, the last 7 years floods have gone up this much. I project this in 100 years. It's like getting your kid at an age growth at age 10 and looking at their rate of growth and saying, if they continue growing at this rate, I project they'll be 30 feet tall by the time they're 18. This is nonsense. The data does not support what he's saying. Peer-reviewed hydrological journals show that floods are not increasing. This has been acknowledged along with all other extreme events. So what Biden's doing is trying to gin up fear, gin up a justification. Important thing, though, is even if we faced a climate catastrophe, this massive pork barrel spending bill would have no impact, drum roll please, Addison, on global emissions. So even if you were worried, you believed all this stuff, hook, line, and sinker, this bill won't even affect global emissions because China, India, the developing world, South America are all going to overwhelm any cuts the United States or Europe could do. So it's just a bunch of a policy change trying to use climate as an excuse. Climate has nothing to do with this. This is about getting their agenda across, trying to label it with a virus or with climate change.
And what exactly, obviously $369 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act are going towards, taking action on the supposed climate crisis. I think it was Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader, his office estimated that they were going to drastically cut carbon emissions over the next several years because now they have these hundreds of billions of dollars. And, I suspect that they're going to use this money to try to really ramp up electric vehicle production. Where do you see all of this going? Let me put it to you this way. How much of the $369 billion do you think is really going to cut carbon emissions?
This is just utter nonsense. President Obama tried the same thing in his first term. And this bill's probably, I had to look at the numbers, 3-4 times bigger. And that, of course, ended with Solandra, ended with all sorts of nonsense. They're reallocating the U.S. economy based on a climate emergency, which does not exist. They're using that as their foundation. And they're just trying to restructure. So this is going. And we saw this with the first round with Obama. Al Gore's companies that he founded or served on the boards of got fully funded. Al Gore's PowerPoint was fully funded when Obama did his green stimulus. CBS News did an analysis where, I can't remember now, 70 or 80% of the money went to Democratic donors, connections with Democratic donors. This has nothing to do with CO2 emissions. And even if the U.S. achieved our cuts, which is absurd, it's not going to affect the global CO2 emissions. So it's all based on a hope and a prayer that some future technology is just going to break through and we're all going to be like, well, there it is. And they're trying to mandate electric cars. They're trying to ban not just the internal combustion engine, but private car ownership. UK Transport Secretary said it's outdated 20th century thinking to own a car. You have the World Economic Forum going after car ownership. You have the United Nations on record. I think it was called the Vancouver Declaration from years ago, saying that private land ownership was bad because it leads to inequity and wealth creation. So they want to stop that. This is what this is about. It has nothing to do with the climate or viruses. or any of the other stated purposes.
You will own nothing. I mentioned this on the show yesterday. You will own nothing and you will be happy about it, dang it, says the World Economic Forum. We're going to take your cars. We're going to take anything that you, cars, tractors, whatever it may be, the way that you keep the lights on in your house, we're going to take all of that away. You're going to sit in a pod and you're going to eat bugs or else. That's the messaging we're getting from the World Economic Forum and increasingly from the Biden administration. I, for one, say no. I know you, for one, also say no. Marc Morano, it's great to have you on the program. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Addison. Appreciate it.